When your lifelong friends decide to Disney bound, you sew something. Never pass up a chance to sew. We decided on Peter Pan, and I opted to dress up as the titular character. So after ideating a bit, I came up with this. I already have these brown boots and a green top. It'll be hot, so I'll need a hat, stick a feather in that. And for bottoms, I like the look of a skirt, but I don't want to risk flashing anyone at the happiest place on earth, so secret pants? I'll see what patterns I can find at Joann's. And I'm in luck. I found this Simplicity pattern by Mimi G, S9550, for this adorable skirt/culotte/secret pants. Then I went to the wall of green fabric. It took me a while, but I finally landed on this floral vine sage cotton, mostly because I could see myself wearing it not just as a Peter Pan costume. And it happens to be the same fabric I nabbed from Joann's website while I was ideating. The first thing I did was pick my size and trace all the pieces. I only just started tracing patterns. I saw other YouTubers doing it or talking about how they didn't do it even though viewers would comment on it. It's a little extra work, but it means I can mess with the pattern more, and if I cut out the wrong size in the end, I haven't destroyed the initial pattern. What I didn't do is make a mock-up because I was lazy and I only had so much time before our trip to Disneyland. Always remember to cut your notches, transfer all the markings onto your fabric, apply iron-on interfacing to the yoke, aka the waistband. The directions that the pattern came with were pretty straightforward, and where I had questions, I found that Mimi G herself has a tutorial video up on YouTube. Pin the front to the back and sew what will become the inseams. I've never made shorts or pants before, so this was a bit of an adventure, and I skipped an important step to make them shorts. Don't be like me. But I will show you my mistake because mistakes are part of the process. What I should have done is sew the crotch seam and then the side seams. What I did was sew the wrong side seams and then the crotch, so I ended up with something unwearable. So I spent some time with the seam ripper. Anyone else's sewing teacher in elementary school call this Jack the Ripper? I did not think until right now how dark that is to name a sewing tool traditionally seen as a woman's task after a serial killer whose victims were young women. Anywho, with the crotch seam sewn, I had to figure out the correct side seams. It took a little spatial manipulation to get it right, but with this flip, these magically become shorts. And now it's easy to identify the matching side seams. Checking in here on the shorts situation, yet another mistake. So the back seam needs to stop 3 inches before the notch, and I just sewed it all the way up. So I have to undo that and then reinforce the end because this is where the zipper's gonna go. After spending more time with the seam ripper, I moved on to adding gathering stitches. I put in 2 rows of basting stitches, one at the stitch line at 5/8 inch and another within the seam allowance at 1/4 inch from the edge. The gathering stitches are broken at the side seams, so when it comes to attach the yoke, we can gather each section more evenly. And then I realized I didn't think about how I was going to finish these seams. And I'm not sure how I want to do it. Maybe can finagle turning it over like that. I decided to turn the seams under, iron them down, and then sew it down with a straight stitch. Just look at that clean seam. I did that for all the seams I've sewn so far. The crotch seam where 4 pieces meet isn't the cleanest, but since I didn't want to take it apart, I just did the best I could. Now back to construction. Connect the pieces of the yoke, then attach the yoke to the upper edge of the shorts by matching the notches and the side seams. Pull on the gathering stitches until the shorts fit within each section. Tie the threads to keep it in place and take a moment to spread the gathers evenly. Baste it together, then stitch. Why do we baste first? I'm not sure. I think maybe to set the gathers, then check if you like how they're distributed before you lock it in with a straight stitch. The next step is to trim the seam. It's always nerve-wracking when the instructions say to cut off excess because it means there's no going back. It's a test for the indecisive and non-committal. Now the yoke is on, we can try it on our body. And the waistband is too big. So here I marked how much I'd like to take in the back and sewed it together with a basting stitch in preparation for the invisible zipper. I just chose to blend the curve from the taken in yoke down into the back seam. I cut off the excess which I regretted. I'm about to put in the zipper, but I've been thinking about this part of the seam. And ideally, this part under here would not be gathered at all. It's creating bulk down under here so that I could just like put that fullness back into the skirt. But we're gonna see what happens. So Jack the Ripper returns to cut the life threads of another sewing error. I undid a little bit of the waistline to the yoke and scrunched it up a little bit more so that I can maximize floofiness on both sides. Yellow line is where these two will be joined eventually here so that we can minimize this seam. Next, we put in the invisible zipper. I watched a few tutorials on this, which includes basting the seam closed, finish the seams, hand baste the invisible zipper on, rip out the stitches holding the zipper closed, then use a zipper foot to get as close as you can to the teeth. Look at that nice invisible zipper. Oops, nearly invisible. Let's go over that bit again so that the zipper will indeed be invisible. And I did, off camera. I'm very pleased. You'll have to put pockets. On to the facing. Connect the 3 pieces of the yoke facing. Stay stitch the top curve so that it doesn't stretch and distort while we sew. And sew a stitch on the lower curve along the seam allowance, which will help us to turn under and press that lower edge. Then trim the seam allowance. I think that will help it lay smoothly in the end. Connect the yoke facing to the yoke. Also across the top of the zipper to enclose it in the facing. Clip the curves to help it lay flat when turned, and trim the seam allowance. No, the seam allowance got caught facing the wrong way. We're trying to be as professional looking as possible. This just won't do. Ah, that's better. Now, where were we? Sew down the back opening with the zipper foot. Trim off the excess and trim the corners. Then flip it around. For some reason, I find these spatial manipulation puzzles are particularly satisfying. Press the seam towards the top and understitch the seam allowance to the facing. This will help keep everything in place. The directions say to understitch as far as possible, so it took some zhuzhing to get close to the zipper. Then press the seam so it's nice and crisp. We're so close! Next is to attach the folded edge of the facing to hide the inner seam. But I discovered that the facing bubbles up because I didn't lay it correctly when I sewed it to the zipper. Look here. So I'm gonna undo this. So I took it apart, marked the sew line more precisely, and resewed it. So I'm gonna pin the facing down so that this is up and this is over. And we're gonna make sure that it's over this stitching so that when we come over here, we're gonna actually stitch in the ditch through here and catch that here. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. I missed the inner facing in a few spots and had to finesse it and go over it again, so it's not the cleanest, but I'm pretty happy with it. We're looking good, so now we're gonna hem the skirt. So I'm going to be just at my knee here, so I've pinned it. I left a lot of fabric since I initially wanted them longer than the pattern called for. I cut off the excess fabric and pinned a 1-inch hem all the way around, and then sewed close to the top fold. And in the end, I do want pockets, which would have been easier to do back when we sewed the side seams together in the first place, but here we are. After that, we're done and ready to put the whole Peter Pan Disney bounding outfit together. After our Disneyland trip, I decided I wanted the shorts to be shorter and there was too much excess in the waistband. I must have taken out 3 inches at least from the yoke, even though I followed the size guide. I'll have another video showing how I took in the waistband, and I'll have one to share how I made this matching top. Thanks for joining me on this sewing journey. See you next time!